People love a good mystery, and one of the most intriguing ones is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke. More than 100 people started this English settlement, but when the English returned 3 years later, it was all overgrown and abandoned. They found tools, rifles, and a strange message carved into a tree, Crow and Croatoan. The question is, what really happened to this mysterious lost colony? Let's go back in time and uncover the truth. In 1587, Governor John White and 117 colonists, among them 97 men, 17 women, and 9 young boys, landed on the northern tip of the present-day North Carolina. This place was not their first choice at all. They intended to land at Chesapeake Bay, which later became the successful British colony of Jamestown. Nevertheless, the captain Simon Fernandez declined to sail north, hence the colonists had to settle down in the place called Roanoke. It was really just a short stop for 15 men who had been left there 2 years ago, but the ship captain made it a point of dropping the colonists in Roanoke Island. To their astonishment, the 15 men they had intended to meet were not there. Rather than an auspicious start, the settlers found a massacre scene, which was the first in a series of obstacles for the new colony. This is the second expedition of John White, who is the governor, and for the English, it is among many efforts to find a successful colony in the wilderness. In 1578, Queen Elizabeth I appointed Sir Humphrey Gilbert to explore the lands in the New World that were not yet claimed by the Spanish, to ensure that England's interests were secured. Gilbert outlined the most suitable places for a permanent colony during the first expedition, but his ship was lost in a shipwreck during the second expedition. Later, after Gilbert died, his half-brother Walter Raleigh was sent to the Spanish Florida to the Arctic for the purpose of colonization. John White, the future governor, is the second member of Raleigh's expedition to 1585. The expedition, which included soldiers as well, arrived in Roanoke in order to construct a fort to strengthen the British presence in the New World. The first encounters between the Native Americans and the colonists are peaceful because the colonists have good intentions. The Roanoke and Croatoan tribes were hospitable to the British. The tribe members, Wanchese and Manteo, went along with the John White and then met Queen Elizabeth's court. Manteo was not only the first Native American who was baptized as a Protestant, but he was also the first one to read the English language. Nevertheless, when they got back to the New World, the British garrison commander created difficulties by attacking native villages. It wasn't long before the relations with other tribes were shattered. The commander waged 2 campaigns against these villages in the course of a few months, which resulted in the atmosphere of the village becoming tense and turbulent. After having kicked the hornet's nest, the British fort was soon under constant attack, and when Sir Francis Drake passed by the region on one of his New World expeditions, the soldiers in the fort ran to the ship to be rescued. Their zeal to move on caused them to leave behind the 3 guides, who had been on an adventure in the woods. When the British returned to the colony later that year, they discovered that the fort had been completely deserted, and the 3 men who had been posted in the woods were nowhere to be found. Sir Richard Grenville, the first expedition's commander, then decided to leave another 15 men behind to defend the fort's remains, giving them a 2-year supply of food before returning to England. At this stage, John White came to Roanoke with the aim of finding the men who had been abandoned there 2 years ago. It came to no one as a surprise that the soldiers had disappeared and they would never be seen or heard from again, most likely slain by the natives. Although the natives were not very welcoming, ship captain Simon Fernandez urged the colonists to stay where they were, and 9 days later, George Howe was killed by American Indians while crabbing on the coast. White did not want to make the situation worse, so he took the extreme steps to restore the relations. He managed to achieve this objective by involving Manteo in the process of making peace between the colony and the Croatoans, who were living on neighboring Hatteras Island. However, Wanchese had developed a distrust of the British during his stay in England, and he saw the group of British colonists as an invading force. Legend has it that he joined in the attack on the 15 men the second time they went to Roanoke. It goes without saying that the relations with the locals were not quite good, but the Croats were nice because of Manteo's influence. The third attempt of the colony that had been previously failed now became successful. The difference was that he did not hire people or soldiers, but he invited families that were eager to defend the land they were fighting on. The fate of the colony would be the fate of themselves, so they had enough motivation to make the venture a success. On the 18th of August, 1587, Eleanor Dare and Ananias Dare, John White's daughter and husband, welcomed the birth of Virginia Dare, the first English infant born on the new continent. As a result, being too late to develop food there, the colonists had to struggle when they arrived. John White went back to England to get supplies for the colony, but the war kept him away for 3 years. When he returned in 1590, he realized that the colony had been left with nobody in it. The things were scattered everywhere, and the structures were overwhelmed with weeds. The valuable things like jewelry were left behind, and the word Croatoan was carved on a tree. John White, though he couldn't confirm it, suspected that the settlers might have migrated to Hatteras Island with the Croatans. The storm made him return to England, and he never was able to save the colonists. Most people think that John White's drawings and a clue he left are the main reasons why the Croatans were more likely to move and live with the inhabitants of Roanoke Island. The second wall was also covered with words, but this time it was the word Croatoan, indicating that they had to protect themselves. It has been 3 years since John White passed away, and the colonists' location is still unknown. In 2013, an expedition to Croatoan Island unearthed European artifacts like rapier, a gun barrel, lead shot, copper scraps, and a slate with a lead pencil. This is very strong evidence that the Roanoke colonists went to the south and joined themselves with the Croatan people. In the 1700s, Native Americans with gray eyes, who claimed to be the descendants of white settlers, were the first to support this story. Although the British items may have come from trading, trash pits suggest the Roanoke settlers might have come here before starvation or war against the other tribes. The trash pits showed an inclination of the natives to adopt the guns from the colonists, a shift from fish to deer. In spite of the past rivalry, the native tribes were usually welcoming to the newcomers. Many English colonists opted to remain with indigenous people instead of going back to their homeland over the years. The simple reason behind the Roanoke colony vanishing is that they chose to live with the Croatan tribe in order to survive. The other theories, such as a massacre, are less probable because no remains were found when John White came back. The situation is more confusing and complicated than we thought. The colonists were confronted with starvation and hostility, and so their only recourse was to seek refuge with a friendly tribe. However, some imaginative theories involve aliens, but there's no sensible reason why aliens would abduct the entire colony, so don't worry about alien brain-eating threats. The Roanoke mystery likely boils down to settlers choosing to live with a welcoming tribe instead of facing starvation. Share your thoughts on what happened to the lost settlers in the comments.